Immogene Rogers was a mail carrier, and she didn't have an enemy in the world.
Every morning, the mail arrives in mailboxes across Pinetta, Florida.
She was the type of person that if she was supposed to be somewhere at a certain time, she was there exactly at that time or slightly early.
But one day, only half of the mail on Immogene's route gets delivered.
So when people started to go to their mailbox and find out that there was no mail there, they were immediately suspicious that something was wrong.
The rest of the mail never arrives. Pinetta, Florida, population 642. This rural town on the Georgia border is so small that postal employee Immogene Rogers must use her own vehicle to deliver the daily mail. During her long career as a mail carrier, Rogers has developed a reputation for her reliability and punctuality. So when the residents of Pinetta fail to receive their mail one afternoon, everyone knows that something is wrong. Terribly wrong. Her car is found off the main road, in the woods.
Outside the vehicle was Miss Rogers' body. She was lying on her back.
A closer look at Immogene Rogers' body shows the straps of her own mail bag tightly cinched around her neck. She has been strangled. The mail is scattered around the seat and floor of the car.
It appeared that her assailant had attacked her from the rear. It appeared that there was a pretty violent struggle within the vehicle. Enough force had been used in the struggle that the driver's seat was actually broken back toward the rear seat. And embedded in the brake pedal, you could actually see where the imprint of Miss Rogers' shoes had pressed so hard to the brake pedal that it had left an indentation of her shoe imprint.
Crime scene technicians place protective coverings over Rogers' hands to safeguard any potential evidence. A tow truck removes Rogers' car from the woods and puts it in storage. Every inch of the vehicle must be processed for fingerprints, for DNA, for hair or fiber. Anything that might point investigators in the direction of a killer. Now, detectives have to inform Immogene Rogers' family. Her husband, Franklin, her daughter, Cindy, and her young son, Lucky, were unprepared for the news.
I was helping my dad in the backhoe, and whenever he got the information that she was missing, I didn't really know that anything but she was missing up until later on that evening when my dad come back with law enforcement. That's when I found out that she'd been murdered.
In an effort to make sense of the senseless, a criminal profiler is asked to join the case. Special Agent Dale Hinman, the first female profiler in the state of Florida, gets the job. Her first glance at the crime scene photos tells her this was a spontaneous killing.
What was most significant about this to me was that no weapon was brought or introduced by the offender into the scene. That when a person kills someone with something that's readily available at the scene, so it doesn't represent a lot of preparation or a lot of bring something with you to tie the victim up, bring something with you to stab or to shoot the victim. This is a very hands-on, but a crime that doesn't demonstrate sophistication or planning.
Special Agent Hinman is quick to note that while the killing looks like a spontaneous attack, it does not look like the work of a stranger.
It's a very close-in type of crime where you put your hands on the person or wrap something around their neck and strangle them or smother them. So I saw this as an offender who probably knew the victim and maybe had some type of negative interaction with her in the past.
What Special Agent Hinman doesn't know is that investigators at the Madison County Sheriff's Department already have a suspect in mind.
Immogene was basically known in the community she was known from a tragic incident that had happened years earlier to her. She had been to a beauty appointment, and as she was coming back, she was followed by an individual, and just as she turned off the main road going toward her house, she was stopped and robbed at gunpoint. She was shot 6 or either 7 times, at which time she was expecting a child in the very near future. She managed to fight through all that. She delivered the child, and they named him Lucky.
The person who almost killed Immogene Rogers 15 years earlier is a man named Earl Daughtry, a drifter who could never hold down a steady job. After Daughtry shot her, he took her purse from the front seat of her car. Chief Deputy Jimmy Bunting responded to the scene, and Earl Daughtry was sent to prison for the assault. But when Bunting hears of Immogene's murder 15 years later, his reaction is immediate.
When I got there, I thought, oh, he finally done it, you know. He finally did it.
A postal worker is found strangled on the side of the road in rural Florida. Police already have a suspect, and criminal profiler Dale Hinman wonders if the murder of Immogene Rogers may have been an act of revenge.
Madison County gave us the list of suspects that they were working in a very matter-of-fact way. They said very early on to me that she had been shot 15 years earlier and that she had survived that attack and the individual had gone to prison. And my next question was, is he still in prison?
The answer is no. Earl Daughtry's sentence was reduced for good behavior, and he was released 5 years before the murder of Immogene Rogers. Now, Special Agent Hinman wonders if Daughtry was likely to seek revenge on Immogene Rogers. Daughtry has a history of mental illness and violent behavior and was a suspect in 3 other murders. Immogene Rogers testified at his trial for the robbery and assault he committed against her.
She sat there like a trooper. She was not afraid of him. She was a very, very brave woman. I'm sure she must have been under a lot of stress, but you wouldn't know it talking to her.
Immogene was forced to recount her ordeal for the jury.
She said that when he walked up to the car, he just reached in and got her pocketbook and smiled at her with an evil grin and walked off and left her. I'm sure he thought she was going to die because she had one bullet at the base of her skull there, but it didn't go into the brain.
When Earl Daughtry received his sentence, Immogene was relieved that justice had been done. But her son Lucky, so named for his survival of the attack, believes that his mother continued to fear Daughtry and wondered if one day he would return to finish the job.
I never heard her say she was afraid he'd come back, but you could tell, I mean, if you know her, you know, I think she watched her back a lot. Once I found out she'd been murdered, yeah, that was the first person I would think about.
After considering all of this information, Special Agent Hinman reaches a surprising conclusion. She is almost certain that Earl Daughtry has nothing to do with the murder.
If Earl Daughtry had committed this crime, he's had 15 years to think about it. I would think that he would have planned this crime out more thoroughly, that he would have taken her farther from where she was last seen. He would have brought a weapon. Something else would have happened to this victim. This crime appears too spontaneous, and using weapons of opportunity doesn't work for somebody who's had 15 years to think about a crime.
But despite the profiler's theory, a potential suspect as strong as Earl Daughtry cannot be ignored. And the U.S. Postal Service assigned some of its best inspectors to track him down.
Everybody's question was, where the hell was Daughtry? And let's find out. So one of the very first meetings that we had, it turned out that myself and another agent, I believe it was an FDLE agent, went up to Georgia, and our job was to find Daughtry and find out where the hell he was and who was with him and what he was doing on the day in question.
The investigators are lucky. They find their suspect close by, in Georgia, working on a construction site.
We found him on a bridge in Albany, Georgia, working with the crew for the state of Georgia, doing bridge repairs. We didn't actually speak to him. As it turned out, he knew we were there. We looked at each other and exchanged glances, and of course he knew we were police, and he knew it had to be about him. But unfortunately, it was confirmed that we could place him in Georgia, far away from the death of Mrs. Rogers, and he couldn't have done it.
With an airtight alibi, Earl Daughtry is now eliminated as a suspect. Dale Hinman's theory was right, but if he is not the killer, who is?
After they presented me with information regarding the person who had shot Mrs. Rogers earlier, the next thing that I asked for is who are the individuals who are on her mail delivery route? Because strangulation homicide is a relatively personal crime. It didn't have the feel of an individual who was a stranger.
Who would want the mail carrier dead, and why? Coming up next on Body of Evidence, investigators reconstruct the last moments of Immogene Rogers' life. Postal worker Immogene Rogers is found strangled by the side of the road in Pinetta, Florida. Rogers had been shot 15 years earlier, but survived that attack. Investigators initially believed that this previous assailant may have come back to finish the job. But the promising lead took investigators nowhere. The man has an airtight alibi for the time of the murder. Now, the team of investigators take the case in a new direction.
I wanted to see a list of all of the people who were on Mrs. Rogers' mail route. Because what if she was delivering mail and she delivered it to the offender's residence, then drove on and he followed her to the point, where he could get to the car?
Special Agent Hinman is certain that a reconstruction of Immogene Rogers' final moments will help them zero in on her killer. Step by step, Hinman and lead investigator Jimmy Bunting set out to retrace Immogene's last movements along her mail route.
So this is a map of the entire county.
Yes, this County Road 150, this driveway, the cul-de-sac. And then the body was found down a little lane right here, driven back into the woods. The fact that she disappeared off of the mail route made the mail route our primary area to start our investigation in.
So what becomes really important at this point in the investigation was that the vehicle track was at box number 41 and no farther on the victim's mail route. So whatever happened to her happened at box 41.
Immogene Rogers had delivered the mail at box 41, but never made it to box 42. That makes the residents at both houses possible suspects. But when investigators interview the family at box 41, their story checks out, and they are scratched off the list of suspects. Now investigators turn their attention to the resident at box 42, Joseph Williams, a lifelong citizen of Pinetta.
Well, I know Joe. I knew Joe well. We'd go up there at night sometime to play nickel, dime, penny poker together with Joe, so I knew him.
Williams has no alibi, but he claims he had no contact with Immogene Rogers on the day she was murdered.
The first thing that stood out to us is he didn't have an alibi for the day. Number two was the fact that the mail stopped at his house on that day.
But before Williams can be considered a good suspect, investigators need more evidence. All along, they have suspected that Immogene's killer left fingerprints on the undelivered mail in her car. And the U.S. Postal Inspectors are in charge of finding them.
We work with the FDLE, and we decided to process every single piece of mail in that vehicle for fingerprints. And we let the FDLE take about 20, 30 pieces off the top of the crime scene there. And then we took the rest, and I'm talking about roughly 800 pieces of mail.
It is a daunting process. Postal investigators check every letter and obtain fingerprint samples from everyone who may have legitimately handled the letters. Hundreds of people are fingerprinted.
So they were separated out based on, say, if a person put a letter in their mailbox that morning and put the flag up for it to be picked up, well, certainly their fingerprints would be on that letter, and that would not be suspicious.
Postal investigators are looking for a needle in a haystack. Among all the fingerprints that should be there, they hope to find the one that shouldn't. But this process takes several weeks, and all Dale Hinman and her colleagues can do is wait. But suddenly the wait is cut short when Joseph Williams, their main suspect, calls investigators and volunteers to take a lie detector test.
Joe Williams had volunteered to take this test to show that he wasn't lying when he was confronted with that. The thing that stood out in my mind is how calm this guy was, is that when he was being set up for the test, his arm was on the table, and this was a hot July day. And it would be normal for anybody to leave perspiration on the table when you take your hand off. For him, he lifted his hand and there was no perspiration on the table.
Coming up on Body of Evidence, Joseph Williams takes the lie detector test. What will the results reveal? 1 month after the death of postal worker Immogene Rogers, police have zeroed in on a primary suspect, Joseph Williams. Investigators know that Immogene was murdered before reaching the Williams family mailbox, and her body was found near their home. Agent Hinman believes the investigation is on the right track.
My focus was on Joseph Williams early in the investigation. The fact that the mail was stopped right before his postal box, that made him become high on my list.
But there is no hard evidence connecting Williams to the crime, and investigators wonder if they might be looking at the wrong man when Williams offers to take a polygraph test. Investigators hold their breath as Williams is brought in to take the test.
I stood behind one-way glass mirror to observe this test. And I remember distinctly when he was asked the question, "Did you cause the death of Immogene Rogers?" And he said no, the deception needle just went right off the chart. And I was like, oh my God, that's the guy that killed our carrier.
Chief Deputy Jimmy Bunting is given the results, and since he knows Williams personally, Bunting decides to confront the suspect himself.
So I gave him a scenario. I said, let me tell you how it happened. And he said, okay, go ahead. And I told him, I said, she came to your mailbox. You and her had a violent altercation. You took the mail bag and put it over her neck, and you turned it 24 times in a clockwise position. And then you took her over where you fished. See, I knew you fished over there. And you dropped her off, and you ran back across these fields to your house. Now, if I had accused you of that or any other person that was innocent, the first thing they would say is, bull, that didn't happen. I know what I would say, bull crap, you got the wrong man.
But Williams neither confirms nor denies Bunting's theory and refuses to say another word to investigators. Shortly thereafter, postal investigators complete their painstaking analysis of the 800 pieces of mail found in Immogene Rogers' car. And they have found the one fingerprint that shouldn't be there.
The day we found out that one of his prints was on the mail, we were having our routine 5 o'clock update and conference. Phone rings, and it was one of the FDLE agents. And then he gets off the phone. He says, we've got a match. We got one of Joe Williams' prints on a piece of mail that was in the vehicle that day. And there was extreme joy in the room. And there was, and at that point, we went and got an arrest warrant immediately and arrested him that afternoon.
Based on this evidence, Joseph Williams pleads guilty to the murder of Immogene Rogers. He is sentenced to life in prison, where he remains today.
So the profile was right on target. I knew that the individual who had shot Immogene Rogers 15 years previously would not be the kind of person who would come back and commit this crime. If he had had 15 years to stew about this crime in prison, he would have at least brought his own weapon. For Joseph Williams, this was a crime of opportunity. He just killed her right then and there.
But why? To this day, Joseph Williams refuses to explain why he killed Immogene Rogers.
There's never a good reason for a crime like this. Some people say that he wanted a ride and she wouldn't give him one. Some people say that there was a piece of mail in the vehicle and Mrs. Rogers wouldn't let him have it. There's never a good reason for a crime like this.
The family of Immogene Rogers still lives in Pinetta. Her husband Franklin and her children still try to make sense of her murder. It is especially hard for her son Lucky.
I think of her every day. It's not a day go by I don't think of her. And I miss her a lot.
Most people are never the victim of a violent crime. Most people don't even know somebody who was the victim of a violent crime. But for a person to be shot and almost killed once and then killed by a person on a postal route, this case was such a tragedy, that she was such a good mother to this baby that was born after she was shot, such a good wife to her husband, such a great employee, and such a wonderful citizen. It's just such a tragedy that something like this occurred.